Good morning. For those of you who I haven't had the pleasure of getting to know, my name is Mackenzie, and I serve as a pastoral associate here at St. Clement's. So today's first reading comes from Paul's first letter to the people of Corinth. At the time that Paul wrote them this letter, this local group of followers of Jesus was now several years old, and they started to see cracks in their foundation and in their community. They were beginning to wrestle with what it means to be the people of God. Having heard about their struggle and in an attempt to redirect them, Paul writes them the letter to the Corinthians. Paul redirects the people, reminding them of what unites them as a faith community. And in turn, as hearers of the same word today, what unites us? That we are God's people. And Paul says that we are not only God's people, but God's temple. Corinth was a Greek city which held famous temples devoted to the Greek gods. So a temple was an image that the people of Corinth were quite familiar with. But how could people be a temple? Temples were, after all, fundamentally places. They were buildings. Temples were set, determined locations to which people would flock to honor the gods. But what Paul was talking about in saying that we are the temple was not a building or a location, but rather a state of being. The idea is that we don't have to go somewhere to honor God or to find God. God is already with us, and God's Spirit has come among us, making the people the temple. It's not a building that honors God. It is not a building where the image of God can be seen or found. Instead, it is in the people's very lives that God will be reflected and honored. Now, this verse or this concept that we are God's temple, that God dwells within us, has often been very poorly applied in the modern world. It's often been applied to have an individual interpretation, as if Paul is teaching that each individual is a separated and individual temple of God. That's interesting but not surprising, because our society often gives us a lens through which we understand the world as individuals. Individual growth, individual success, individual experience, these are promoted in our society. Just take a walk at the bookstore and see all the self-help books lining the shelves. They're there to teach us how you can find success all on your own. Many of them suggest that if you can just get the right habits down, you can do anything. And thank God, because you finally won't have to rely on anyone else. If you can manage just to get up at 5 in the morning, if you can make it to the gym, if you can journal about the right things, the list goes on, but the ultimate goal is to improve yourself and be self-sustaining. Then the world promises us if we do things right, we'll find happiness, we'll find success, and it will be all that more enjoyable because it is a self-sufficient success. The foundation of those ideas is the self. But we see a contrast in the way of following Jesus, because we don't follow Jesus on our own. God's temple is not, though we may have been led to believe, made up of individuals, separated and detached from one another. Instead, God's temple is made of many people. And following Jesus automatically involves being interconnected with God and with one another. A few weeks ago here at St. Clement's at our 9:30 service, we celebrated a baptism. And if you missed that one, I'm sure many of you have been to a baptism before. Baptisms are always done publicly in the presence of the community of the faithful. And at the baptism, the priest asks the whole community present, "Will you who witness this baptism do all in your power to support the baptized in their life with Christ?" Why does the baptism of one person involve a promise from everyone in attendance that they will help this person on their journey? Because right from our very beginning with our time with the church, we don't follow Jesus on our own. In one of the recent courses I took in seminary, we were asked to read the book Unapologetic by Francis Stupor. The author sets out to address why in a world that is overflowing with self-help, that does not rely on religiosity, why, with all these options to better ourselves by our own willpower, without the help of God or with others, why do people remain Christians? Spuford answers with this. Because when we find that we relentlessly pursue ourselves, we eventually hit a wall that Spuford calls the human tendency to screw things up. And I'll add this, the human tendency to screw things up when we go at it alone. In the ideal world of self-help, you can choose who you are and what you are, and who you're going to be. If you do all the things exactly right, you won't screw it up. But in the real world, we find that this comes crashing down around us. Because one person can never do everything, if anything, on their own. And that is why the church offers us a different reality. You don't journey on your own. Following Jesus is not an individual pursuit, and it does not rely on individuals to get things right. Being God's temple is not an individual reality, it is a communal reality at its root. So the scripture today calls us to wonder, on what foundation have we built our lives? Is it on a foundation of ourselves, or on a foundation of Christ, which instills in us a trust that with God's help and with the help of others, we can go much, much further? We are often so tempted to idolize strength and independence, to say, I don't need any help. I can do it on my own. But why? Jesus says to us, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." And the other scriptures say, "Bear one another's burdens." That is how we are God's temple. That is how we honor God. By admitting that we can't do everything on our own, and by declaring that we don't need to, because God carries us forward. And God has given us God's own Spirit to unite us, to guide us, and to lift our heavy burdens. Now, the season of Lent will begin on this upcoming Wednesday. And at St. Clement's and in churches all across the world, we will commemorate Ash Wednesday. Many will go to churches and receive ashes on their foreheads. The purpose of this day and of this ritual with the ashes is to remember our mortality. And what is our mortality except our ultimate human limitation? The limitations of humanity are seen in contrast with the power of God. On Ash Wednesday and throughout Lent, we honor God by recognizing our need for God, by admitting that we can't do everything on our own because of our limitations. The foundation of God's temple is not individuals. Instead, it is the person and teachings of Jesus who shows us how to honor God by recognizing God's wisdom in light of our own foolishness. And God's temple raised up is not an individual. It's a community of people who say, "God, we need your help," and whom offer one another a little help along the way. Thank you.